Angel of Death. It's a pretty scary nickname.
Yeah, it sends chills down your spine for sure.
And that nickname is attached to Charles Cullen,
A former nurse.
who confessed to killing.
At least 29 patients.
But the really scary part is that investigators think
The actual number could be way higher.
potentially even hundreds.
It's a terrifying thought.
And in this deep dive, we're going to take a look at this case
Try to understand how Cullen was able to operate for so long.
and how he was able to exploit the trust that people put in medical professionals.
It's a story that makes us look at the dark side of human nature.
Cullen pretended to be a caregiver,
Someone dedicated to healing.
but he was secretly carrying out these awful acts.
Acts that are hard to even imagine.
We've got a lot of information to go through today.
Court documents, psychological profiles, interviews.
They all give us information about Cullen.
A man driven by things we may never fully understand.
So we know you're interested in true crime, so let's get started with Cullen's early life.
Our sources paint a pretty bleak picture.
His dad died when he was just a baby.
And then when he was 17, another tragedy struck.
His mom died in a car crash.
That kind of loss.
Repeated loss during those early years.
Well, it can really leave a mark on a person.
And while we can't say for sure that these events led to his later actions,
It's hard to ignore the potential impact on his psychology as he developed.
it's like a chain reaction.
Each loss leading to the next stage in this downward spiral.
Then there's his time in the Navy.
He joined in 1978.
But even in the Navy, there were signs of instability.
The sources mention one incident in particular,
He tampered with a missile control panel.
which is disturbing.
It shows that he was capable of doing things that weren't just about personal conflicts or revenge.
Mess with a missile control panel.
It suggests a desire to cause disruption,
Exert control
even to create chaos.
on a massive scale.
It's really unsettling to think that this might have been a sign of things to come.
Like he was testing the waters.
Seeing how far he could go in manipulating life and death.
But he was discharged from the Navy.
And then in a kind of surprising turn of events, he graduated from nursing school in 1986.
You'd think that this would be a sign that he wanted to turn his life around.
Use his skills for good.
But that's not what happened.
This is where the story takes a dark turn.
Cullen got his first job as a nurse.
At St. Barnabas Medical Center in 1987.
And that's when his killing spree started.
And it's just chilling how calculated his methods were.
He used lethal injections.
Of drugs like insulin and digoxin.
Drugs that can cause serious heart problems.
Problems that can be really hard to detect.
Do you think he picked these drugs specifically because he knew how they worked?
And how their effects could be misinterpreted.
That's a good question.
It seems likely.
Our sources say that Cullen was really drawn to digoxin.
And the thing about digoxin toxicity is that it can look a lot like natural heart failure.
Which makes it really difficult to prove that there was foul play involved.
It's disturbing.
He knew what he was doing.
And he was using his medical knowledge in a truly terrifying way.
Deliberately choosing ways to kill that would allow him to blend in.
Hide his crimes among all the other things that happen in a busy hospital.
And according to our sources, his very first victim was admitted for a minor medical issue.
So this wasn't a mercy killing.
It seems almost random, doesn't it?
Picking a victim who seemed to have a good chance of recovery.
It really challenges the idea that he was motivated by mercy.
And as we go deeper into Cullen's career, we'll see this pattern repeat itself,
Moving from one hospital to another.
leaving a string of victims in his wake.
But the question that keeps coming up is, why wasn't he stopped sooner? And that's where we really start to see how the system failed.
Yeah, how did he get away with this for so long?
You see, Cullen often left these hospitals under suspicion.
Right, there were always rumors.
But instead of looking into it,
Doing a real investigation.
a lot of these institutions just let him go quietly.
They didn't want any trouble.
They were worried about bad publicity. Lawsuits?
Anything that could hurt their reputation.
So they just swept it all under the rug.
Hoping it would all just go away.
But by doing that, they were basically giving Cullen permission to keep killing.
Exactly, and this happened over and over again.
He'd move to a new hospital.
And the cycle would continue.
It's scary to think about.
How many times institutions put their own interests ahead of the safety of the people they're supposed to be protecting?
It's a really disturbing thought.
And it gets even worse when you consider that not all of Cullen's victims were old or terminally ill.
Right. Some people think he was doing this out of mercy.
But our sources show that he killed a wide range of people.
Some were young.
Some had conditions that could be treated.
So it wasn't just mercy.
It seems like he was playing God,
Deciding who lived and who died.
based on some twisted logic of his own.
One case that really shows this. is the case of Reverend Florian Gall
He was recovering from a heart attack,
at a hospital in Pennsylvania.
and Cullen injected him with a lethal dose of digoxin, like we talked about earlier.
And the really sad thing is that Reverend Gall's death was at first thought to be from natural causes.
Like so many others.
It makes you wonder how many deaths that were ruled natural were actually because of Cullen.
It's a terrifying thought.
This case shows us that even in a place like a hospital where things are supposed to be carefully monitored and recorded, mistakes can happen.
But it's not like nobody knew what was going on.
Right.
There were signs.
Red flags that people saw but didn't do anything about.
So why weren't they taken seriously?
Our sources tell us that some of Cullen's colleagues noticed him acting strangely.
Like how?
He was withdrawn,
Quiet.
often late.
Unreliable.
Sometimes he looked disheveled.
Messy.
And some people even reported seeing him near patients' rooms at odd hours.
When he wasn't supposed to be there.
These weren't just vague suspicions
These were actual observations.
that, if they'd been taken seriously, might have stopped him.
So why were they ignored?
Maybe people were afraid to say anything.
Worried about what would happen if they were wrong.
Maybe they didn't want to cause trouble.
Or maybe they just didn't think it was a big deal.
Whatever the reason, those missed opportunities meant that Cullen was able to keep going for much longer than he should have.
But eventually he was caught.
Yes. Thankfully, there was a turning point
In 2002.
at Somerset Medical Center.
The last hospital where Cullen worked.
What was it about Somerset that finally led to his capture?
That's a good question.
Well, for one thing, advances in medical record keeping played a big role.
So technology helped catch him.
Somerset had a new system.
That's interesting.
It allowed administrators to track unusual patterns in patient care.
So they could see if something was off.
Exactly, and what they found was alarming.
A huge increase in sudden health declines,
And deaths.
specifically during Cullen's shifts.
The evidence was right there in the data.
It was too obvious to ignore.
So technology played a big part.
Better record keeping.
But it wasn't just the technology, it was also the people who saw the red flags and took action.
They didn't just ignore it.
That's right. There were people at Somerset who refused to let this go unnoticed.
They put the pieces together.
They connected the dots.
And they had the courage to start an official investigation.
And that investigation quickly uncovered something else.
What was that?
Cullen was caught looking at medical records of patients who weren't even assigned to him.
That's pretty damning evidence.
It was a clear sign that he was up to no good.
And the investigation just kept uncovering more and more of his crimes.
The evidence was piling up.
And in December 2003, he was arrested.
At first, he was only charged with one murder and one attempted murder.
But then he confessed.
And not just to a few more killings.
He admitted to killing dozens of patients.
Over his entire 16-year career.
Wow, that must have been a shock to everyone.
The hospital staff,
The investigators.
and especially the families of the victims.
It wasn't just a couple of isolated incidents.
It was a pattern of lies and cruelty that spanned years in multiple states.
But then there's this weird twist.
What's that?
He claimed he was acting out of mercy.
Yes, but as we'll see, that claim was strongly disputed by the families of his victims.
I mean, how can someone kill all these people and say it was out of mercy?
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It just doesn't make sense.
And the sheer number of victims.
And the fact that they weren't all close to death.
It makes it really difficult to believe that compassion was his only motivation.
Like we've said.
Some of these people weren't terminally ill.
Some of them were actually getting better.
It's more like he was deciding who deserved to live and who deserved to die.
Yeah, like he was playing God.
But whatever his reasons were,
The legal system still had to do its job.
in 2004, Cullen pleaded guilty.
To a whole lot of charges.
Multiple murders.
And attempted murders.
In both New Jersey and Pennsylvania.
So what happened to him?
Well, given all the evidence.
And his confession.
The sentence wasn't really a surprise.
He got life in prison.
11 consecutive life terms.
Wow.
With no chance of parole.
So he's going to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
That's right.
But even with the trial over,
And Cullen behind bars.
the case wasn't really closed.
Why not?
Well, as part of his plea deal, Cullen agreed to help investigators.
Oh, to identify other potential victims.
Exactly.
That must have been incredibly difficult for the families.
To have to go through all of that again.
While investigators try to figure out the full extent of his crimes,
It's heartbreaking.
the sentencing hearings were full of emotion,
Anger.
grief.
A sense of betrayal.
These families had put their trust in the healthcare system.
They thought their loved ones were in a place of healing.
But instead, they encountered a predator disguised as a nurse.
It's a terrifying thought.
And this case really shows us that the impact of Cullen's crimes goes far beyond the victims themselves.
Families were destroyed,
Communities were left shaken.
and people's trust in the medical profession was deeply damaged.
So what can we learn from all this?
It's a dark chapter in medical history
But it's a story that needs to be told
because it forces us to ask some hard questions.
about how systems can fail
How warning signs can be missed,
and how a culture of silence can develop.
even in places where people are supposed to be caring for others.
We've seen how a combination of individual evil
And institutional negligence.
allowed Cullen to get away with murder for so long,
He was able to take advantage of weaknesses in the system,
moving from one hospital to the next.
leaving a trail of pain and suffering behind him.
It's a chilling reminder that we might not be able to stop evil from existing,
But we can try to create safeguards.
to make it harder for people like Cullen to operate,
The changes that were made after this case are a step in the right direction,
like stricter background checks for healthcare workers.
and better ways to report suspicious behavior.
But they're also a tragic reminder that these changes came too late for so many people.
It makes you wonder what could have been done differently.
How can we create a culture where people feel safe speaking up when something's wrong?
Not just in healthcare,
But everywhere,
where speaking up becomes the rule.
not the exception.
It's a challenge we all need to think about.
Because ultimately, preventing tragedies like this requires everyone to work together.
We need to be aware
Informed.
and willing to raise our voices when something doesn't seem right,
That's the only way to truly honor the memory of those who are lost.
and to build a safer, more accountable world for all of us.
If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into more cases like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like the video if you found the story compelling, and share it with your friends and family who might be interested in true crime and mysteries. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all our latest content and join a growing community of curious minds exploring the most fascinating cases. Click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything.